And good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We're so excited to have you and for you to have the opportunity to get to hear Professor Joan Braun speak about elder mediation. I know I learned so much from her while I was in law school. And so I'm so excited that, you get to hear and share her wealth of knowledge. I'm going to start with a little bio and then we'll let her take things over. So Joan Braun is professor at the Boer Alaskan Faculty of Law, where she teaches alternative dispute resolution. She also is a mediator at Vista Mediation Group. She's a lawyer called to the bar in Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta, and has several mediation certifications, including certifications in family mediation, elder mediation, and civil mediation. She has served as the chair of the national executive for the Canadian Bar Association's Alternative Dispute Resolution section and is currently serving as a member at large for the Canadian Bar Association's National Elder Law Section executive and co-chair of the Alternative Dispute Resolutions Elder Mediation section. In 2015 and 2016, she was the ACR representative to the task force for the Elder Care and Coordination pilot project. Elder Care and Coordination is a new ADR model for resolving guardianship and advanced planning disputes, which has now been implemented in the courts in several states. In a more recent project, she developed an elder mediator training manual in a research project funded by the Law Foundation of BC. Okay, so I'll let you take over.
Great. So I have some slides. So what I'd say is that I understand that often with these presentations, it's often informal where people ask questions as you go along. So I welcome questions as we go along, or else we can wait till the end and I'll try to leave some time for questions. But before I put up the slides, I'll just say a little bit about myself. That kind of was a description of what I've done professionally, but just to share a little bit of how I got interested in elder mediation. So in 2007, I had been working in private practice as a mediator, amongst other things, and I had the privilege of getting hired by an organization that was setting up a legal aid clinic for older adults, so a specialty legal aid clinic for older adults who were vulnerable or also generally low income, etc. And we had a toll-free phone line. And there was supposed to be a phone line for seniors from around the province to call with questions they had. And it turned out that a lot of the calls we got were from family members who were in great distress because someone was trying to steal mom's assets or there was a conflict over powers of attorney, etc. And with my mediation background, I became really interested in would elder mediation be something that could help? So I got involved in elder mediation and actually have been the chair of the Association on Conflict Resolution. Is the only organization I'm aware of that has a specialty section on elder mediation. And so I've been involved in that actually as a co-chair before I came to Aurora, Alaskan as a professor. So that's a little bit about how my interest in this particular topic evolved. And I'm going to now share, hopefully, my PowerPoints. There, that should, I presume we can see the PowerPoints. If not, let me know. So this is a presentation by me, as it says, about elder mediation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about elder mediation. Oh, by the way, I probably may not be able to see if your hands go up. So Gabrielle, maybe if a hand goes up and I don't see it, you could just grab my attention. Don't be afraid to kind of interrupt her wave. So I'm going to talk about what elder mediation is. There's some things that are really unique about it. So I'm going to talk about those and walk you through a typical process and tell you a little bit about how to get trained if people are interested in that, or how to choose an elder mediator. So essentially, elder mediation is mediating disputes that arise in the context of aging. So this could be a situation where either one of the parties is an older adult, or whether the types of issues that are particularly important to older adults, for example, long-term care planning, that type of thing. And, often these issues are a family dispute between the older adult and the adult children. But, sometimes elder mediation might occur with a third party involved. So it might actually be, say, a dispute between a care home and an older adult. So if it's a family dispute, it could arise. Picture a situation where or dad are suddenly developing health issues, need some help, have asked their adult children to help with that. And this then leads to big family conflict over things like who should pay the bills, where mom or dad should live, is it necessary to move into long-term care, division of care, giving responsibilities among family members. There is a subset of elder mediation which focuses on questions of guardianship. So if mom or dad may not actually be able to manage their finances or their other decisions, who should be deciding on their behalf? And obviously in mediation, you can't make a determination of capacity, but you may not need to make one if the family creates a plan for who will provide support and help. Elder mediation is a very interesting area because I find that often the issues are a mix of legal and non-legal issues. And so elder mediator, as I'll talk about later, really needs to have an understanding of aging and also an understanding of the legal issues that may be relevant. As I said, the dispute may be between the long-term care facility and the older adult.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
When, because you said in the mediation, you won't be able to decide, usually it's not the forum to decide the capacity of an
Right.
individual. So when would you do that?
Well, a legal determination really of capacity can only be made by someone who has the legal authority to do that, which could be a court often, but sometimes in statute, it'll give the authority to someone else to make the decision. So for example, there might be a statutory guardian appointed through a particular process, but really the rule is that determination of legal capacity can only be made by someone who has the authority to make that determination, which is of course why it can't be made in mediation, because no one has the authority to make that. But if somebody is not managing their money well, and everybody in the room can agree, and all their support persons, that they'll step in and help, it's not necessary then to proceed to a legal determination. It's almost like setting up an informal supported decision-making arrangement as an alternative. So yeah, that's a good question. These issues of capacity come up a lot in elder mediation, but really a mediator cannot make those kinds of decisions. They just don't have the authority to do that. A mediator could decide if, say, an older adult wanted, there was a family dispute that came to the mediator, and it was very clear that say the older adult had dementia and couldn't actually understand what was going on, the mediator might ethically decide we can't proceed, but they can't make a legal determination. So one of the early people in the field made this comment that loss, stress, and change in circumstances as we age may be the true axis around which these conflicts turn. So very often, conflicts in the family will arise at a point in which there's been a change in situation, suddenly a new health issue, some sort of a crisis. And one of the things that makes them so complicated, a colleague of mine who actually wrote a book with a delightful title called Mom Always Loved You Best, I think the title explains it all, is that once the conflicts arise, then long-term hurt feelings and family dynamics can get involved and make it hard to resolve things. So these kinds of disputes, some of the things that complicate them is there can be personal identity and values involved. Often in those situations, and think about it and right away you'll recognize the truth of this, is that you could have a situation where the adult child wants the parent to be safe, but the older adult, what's most important to them is that they want independence. So the adult child is saying, Mom, Dad, I don't believe you're safe at home. And the older adult's essentially saying, I don't care, I want to stay in my home. So, and different family members may actually have different values about this issue of safety and autonomy. So if you take, for example, a situation with the mythical Green family here, Mrs. Green is older. She's been living in her home for a period of time. And the person who provides the most support to her, but kind of informal support, is her daughter, Mary, who lives nearby. And Mary drops by periodically and runs errands for mom and that type of thing. And Mary's been noticing recently that Mrs. Green seems to be having some trouble, increasing trouble with um, those tasks. And suddenly the niece of Mrs. Green has moved in and has offered to help. But the daughter becomes very concerned because she feels like maybe the niece is actually taking advantage. There seems to be a lot of gifting from Mrs. Green to the niece. And so the daughter starts to worry about ulterior motives. Shows she speaks to her sister and her brother, and none of them can agree to what to do. One of them believes the niece should be there helping. Another believes that Mrs. Green is fine in the home. And they're all in great disagreement about what should happen at that point in time. And there's a family conflict. And Mrs. Green's position in that case may be that she feels quite fine with that situation. And not resolving this can lead to stress on the family, actually an estrangement between family members. And ultimately, there could be harm to the older adult. Imagine that Mrs. Green, for example, has early dementia and doesn't really understand totally what's going on. Maybe the niece is taking advantage in that situation. So, you know, often in these situations, families might not necessarily agree to come to mediation. That can be a barrier, but if the family will come, it's a way of getting this resolved without the conflict continuing to escalate. Now, as I already mentioned, these disputes typically are comprised of legal and non-legal issues mixed. And elder mediation, as is true of all types of mediation really, provides an opportunity to resolve disputes in an amicable way that maintains relationships. And anyone who works in this field or works with older adults will know that it's very common, even if there's a conflict, or even if a family member might not be treating the older adult very well, that older adults typically want to maintain their relationships, particularly with their adult children. So resolving this in an amicable way is very important. So there are some things that are unique about elder mediation. I'm presuming that everyone here is familiar with all different types of mediation, but let me say some of the things that are particularly unique about this area of practice. First of all, it's really multidisciplinary. There's legal issues, it might be necessary for the mediator to understand who has the authority to decide if there's, say, a substitute decision maker, like someone who has a power of attorney. There might be legal issues about, say, if one of the decisions being made is, mom really should move into long-term care, and should the home be sold? Well, there's legal issues around that as well. But there's also a great deal of social issues, issues having to do with aging and changes in the family as someone's aging, and other pressing social issues. There could be, in some cases, as was in the scenario I gave you, the possibility of financial exploitation or abuse, and that's something that mediators need to be aware of. So, and these social issues, as going on from that, the mediator needs to understand aging and gerontological issues. And it's sort of interesting because one expert on elder law commented that not that much work is being done in looking at issues where there's a nexus between the law and gerontological issues. And elder mediation is one of those areas. It's important to understand the issues related to aging and also relevant issues to do with the law in order to be effective in this field. And elder mediation is truly a multi-party family mediation, typically, unless it's a dispute between a long-term care home and the older adult or the family. So you could have a situation where there's a dispute, and people who are present at the mediation could include adult children, the older adult or adults. There might be extended family members that are involved. The older adult may have support people in their life if, say, there's physical issues or they're needing help in some way, and it could be advantageous to have them there. There could be lawyers, there could be other people. And so when you get that many people involved, it adds some complication. First of all, it adds complication convening, because not everybody who's involved in the dispute may want to come to mediation. And it's important to create an agenda that can be decided by the people there. People who are at mediation can't, for example, decide that, you know, cousin Johnny, who's not in the room, is going to play a role in taking care of the care of mom or dad. You need to have the parties, the people who are involved in the dispute at the table. So there's a lot of work at the beginning of figuring out who needs to attend and what the agenda items are. And then as the mediator walks through the dispute, there's complications in dealing with those dynamics. My colleague who wrote Mom Always Loved You Best is one of the most experienced mediators or pioneers in this area. And so in, you know, her experience, a lot of these disputes have long-standing, complicated family dynamics. So let me tell you a little bit about where the elder mediation field is at. Elder mediation is really a lot more, it's a larger field in the United States. It's not huge, but it's larger. Perhaps not coincidentally, when I worked at the legal clinic for older adults, we happened to have a consultant on board who was from the States and was familiar with elder mediation in the States, which is what helped me to start thinking about this. And later in this presentation, I'll mention the organization that I've been involved with. And it was primarily an American organization, although more and more Canadians are becoming involved. But in the US, there's a wide range of disputes involving lawyers and non-lawyer mediators. In Canada, elder mediation is smaller. There are a couple of reasons for this. I don't need to elaborate on it, but some of it has to do with funding. In the United States, there's an Older Americans Act, and there's sometimes funding available for programs through that aren't available in Canada. So it's mostly to do with practical reasons. It's not that there's not a need in Canada. It's just that some issues like funding make it more difficult to grow the field. So in Canada, because there are a smaller number of elder mediators and the field is smaller, often mediators will negotiate a more narrow range of disputes, and there probably are more lawyer elder mediators than non-lawyer elder mediators. I believe this practice area has great potential and is underutilized. A lot of the people that could be helped through elder mediation are the very families that made many calls to the toll-free line for the organization that I work for. And, you know, this is something that I've discussed with the public guardian trustee in BC, et cetera. So the practice area has great potential and is starting to grow, but it's still smaller than the potential would indicate. So let's talk about the process and stages of elder mediation. I think every kind of mediation process, whether it's area of law or type of issues, can differ a little bit. One of the things that is, I won't say unique, but somewhat unique in elder mediation is that typically there's a long period at the beginning of convening and setting up the mediation before there's ever a joint session. As I already mentioned, you can have quite a few different family members or people that are part of the dispute, and they may not all want to come to the elder mediation. And so the mediator often has to talk to different people and decide who wants to be part of the process. and to identify what the goal is. And it's also, and to sort out questions like, if it happens to be an older adult and there's difficulties such as dementia, can that person actually make decisions, or is there a substitute decision maker involved? So there's a little bit of that sort of screening and sorting. But in the pre-mediation stage, that's also a really good time, and it's commonly done for the mediator to have individual meetings with the participants. And in any mediation where there's really, really complex disputes and issues, a pre-mediation meeting, that is a meeting before the joint session, can be really helpful because it's a way to start coaching people and helping them to think about how to present their point of view in the joint session, and to discover if there's any kind of alliances or power imbalances or things that you want to be aware of when you're in mediation. So it's very common to have this kind of pre-mediation meeting. And of course, with older adults, the prevalence of elder abuse, tends to vary from study to study, but is somewhere around 7 or 8% of the older adult population. So there's always the possibility that there might be some type of abuse. So you want to screen for that in the same way as you would with family mediation. So once the pre-mediation meetings have occurred, it's typical to have a joint meeting. So meet with all the parties together, get the agenda out on there, start talking about the issues, brainstorming options, choosing solutions. Sometimes, because typically quite a few people are involved, it's good to stop and to caucus with some individual members, but a lot of time is often involved in joint meetings. And I know with some types of mediation, especially ones that are more closely associated with the legal process, those can be run very much like settlement hearings, and there's a lot of shuttle mediation, shuttle negotiation, where the mediator will meet with one party and take offers to the other party. I don't think that's very true of elder mediation, and probably wouldn't work because it's such a mix of legal and non-legal issues. And often the parties really want to come up with a resolution that maintains and restores relationship. And that's probably not going to happen unless they get some help in talking to each other. So that's a big part of the mediator's role in this type of mediation. And then, of course, lastly, a plan is made or some type of an agreement. Since, especially here in Canada, an elder mediation, it would commonly be done by a mediator in private practice, and there might not be a court dispute involved, so you wouldn't be making an agreement to go to court. When in that bio at the beginning, it mentioned that I was involved in a project called Elder Caring Coordination. In the United States, it's somewhat more litigious in this area, and a lot of families repeatedly end up in court arguing about safety issues for older adults and advanced planning issues. And so the courts in a number of jurisdictions have developed a process that's a lot like parenting coordination, where as once it's gone to court, as disputes continue to arise, the coordinator will help the family resolve those disputes on an ongoing basis. I think that's probably not a model that would work here as well, because in my experience, a lot of elder mediation disputes and dispute resolution is not of issue. They may have legal issues involved, but they're not related to a court case that's ongoing at that particular moment. So when is elder mediation appropriate? Elder mediation can be used preventatively. Sometimes families just really can't talk about things. If you think about it, maybe think of people that you know, it's very hard for families to talk about what would happen if there's an illness in the future? What happens if mom or dad is not able to take care of themselves? Who will step in? What will occur? It's really uncomfortable to talk about those things. I mean, some people have actually started businesses around the whole idea of this difficult conversation and how to give families tools to talk about these things. But and a trained elder mediator can also play a role before, either in the early stages of a dispute or well in advance, to help facilitate and have the family plan what would happen in the eventuality that mom or dad needs some assistance. And in some ways, this would be like there now are some mediators who will help families when the older adult is creating a will, that they'll actually do some family facilitation to help the rest of the family understand what the wishes of the older adult is. So this is a bit of an aside, but there's a great book by Ian Hull of Toronto. It's a bit of an old book, but it's designed to hand out to families, talking about this model of when mom or dad drafts the will, getting the whole family together to talk about it and, to plan for it so there's no dispute later. But the same thing can actually be done with advanced care planning issues and that type of thing. And in fact, some research actually suggests that elder mediation employed early, so maybe not preventatively, but when the conflict is first starting to arise, that actually can prevent elder abuse. So Yvonne Craig some years ago did an extremely robust study. It was her dissertation, where she looked at elder mediation. I think it was in 5 different centers. And her research actually showed that elder mediation can prevent elder abuse if the mediation is done early in the cycle. It also can be used to resolve the dispute once the conflict has arisen. And as I already mentioned, we've talked a lot about, care issues and so on, but elder guardianship mediation is a specialty and it can be used to resolve a dispute over guardianship. There actually are some American jurisdictions where if there's a court case for guardianship, the case is directed to a mediator, and the mediator doesn't, as I said, make a determination of capacity, but tries to come up with an agreement. British Columbia passed a law which most of the new guardianship statute hasn't come into force even after many years, but British Columbia's law actually has a provision in it to have basically a court-based elder guardianship mediation process. The BC Law Institute actually wrote a paper some years ago about elder guardianship mediation, with the anticipation that law would come into force, but for whatever reason, it didn't. So just a couple last slides, and then I'll throw it open for questions. So if you want to choose an elder mediator, there aren't that many of them in Canada yet. So, so I guess in a sense that helps to narrow it down. But I would say that it's important to research the mediator. There are some people who say they'll do elder mediation, but they don't have any specific training. And I really think it's important to understand the law and some of the social issues around this. So research the mediator and their background and make sure that they have some kind of training. There aren't that many Canadian training programs, although there are some. Family Mediation Canada has I guess you'd call it a branch. It has a different name, but it's associated with Family Mediation Canada that does some elder mediation training. Anyway, I'll talk about training on the next slide, but an elder mediator should understand at a minimum issues like aging, family dynamics, elder abuse, and relevant elder law issues. So training is advised. If anyone's interested in this area, as I said, Family Mediation Canada has some training and a few other training programs. It also might be possible to take training from some US trainers. Crystal Thorpe, with the book I mentioned earlier, Mom Always Loved You Best, they were one of the first organizations in the field and actually are now offering their training for mediators online. But there also are opportunities for professional development and growth. So I just flagged the organization, the Association on Conflict Resolution. They have an elder mediation section, which I've been involved with for some time. Before I was involved with Elder Mediation Canada, with the ACR's Elder Mediation section, they published a publication that had some guidelines for training competencies that it's good to have. But much more importantly, or probably relevantly, if anyone is interested in this area, we actually have monthly meetings on Zoom that are free for anyone to attend. And we have special speakers on different topics relevant to elder mediation. There's about 200 people on our mailing list, so different people show up each time depending on who the speaker is. We have some discussion. It lasts about an hour. So if anyone is interested in that, you can contact me. That's me and my contact information, and I'd be happy to forward your name to my colleague who keeps the we have a email list that we send out meeting notices once a month. So if anyone is interested in finding out more or being involved in that, just email me. So that is about all that I have presentation wise, and I'm shut that off and see what questions people have for me.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. And we have a newsletter coming out in November, and it's going to be, we have different themes, and November's is going to be elder mediation. So I'm going to share some of the links and books that you suggested. Also, I have the book you suggested in the chat. So if anyone's interested, the Mom Always Liked You, is that?
I think it's Mom Always Loved You Best.
Moms Always Love You Best.
It's by Arlene Cardassis, Crystal Thorpe, and Rick Larson, I think.
I think, yeah, Mom, I have that right in there. So if you guys are interested, it's right there. It has a really high rating. So, and it gets your gold star. So I'm sure it's a phenomenal book. I'll let anyone who has questions ask, and then I have some of my own as well.
Oh, and I also, I think that the Ontario Mediation Organization has also lately done some training. Risa Eisen, who's been involved, I've known Risa for some years. Risa was involved in helping to develop those training standards a few years ago. But so Risa has been involved in that. But I think it goes that other people are involved as well in delivering those workshops. So just an added comment. Yeah, anyway, I'll be quiet and see if there's questions.
Emery, Paul, you think you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Like when there is an elder mediation process going on, and like the aging people, they are stressed out. So can a mediator be empathetic and sympathetic towards them? Like managing emotions in the process.
Well, I think you've actually hit a nail on the head, so to speak, because it's particularly stressful for the older adult who often doesn't like to be a burden on their family, doesn't like the conflict between their children. And it's very important that the mediator is empathetic and have the skills to be able to do that. And best practices in the field, so to speak, are that essentially the older adult should be the center of the center, in the sense that the most important voice in the room should be the older adults. And so the older adult is not going to often be able to express their wishes because of stress and the things that you've mentioned. So a skilled elder mediator will help bring the voice of the older adult's voice forward and help them to communicate their concerns to their family, etc.
So in the brainstorming, ideas, when we come to that stage, can a mediator be a voice of voice of the older people to brainstorm ideas even?
I would say yes. It's interesting because there are some people in the mediation field who believe that the mediator needs to, I think we're all agreed the mediator needs to stay neutral. But some people in the field would feel cautious of having the mediator play the sort of role you're describing, with the idea that it'll make the mediator to not be neutral. But I think sometimes in the elder mediation field, depending, because some older adults develop disabilities as they get older and may particularly need assistance in communicating, basically some accommodation or support. And so the mediator could play that role to a degree, being cautious though that they don't want to seem biased. Another way that they could do that though would be to see if there's someone that the older adult would feel comfortable with being their support person, or their friend. That doesn't have to be called a support person, but someone who would come to the mediation and play that role on behalf of the older adult and provide that kind of support. So that would be one way to provide the support needed to kind of balance things and bring that voice forward without the mediator having to do that all themselves.
Okay. One more question. What to what extent, are the cases being solved, like compromising, accommodating? To what extent do they get solved?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer, what percentage get resolved. I think that probably that if people, in my experience and the experience of my colleagues, the most difficult thing about elder mediation is that many people don't want to come to mediation. This is one of the obstacles to the field, because since there's no government funding, people have to pay for it themselves. That's a bit of an aside. But since there's a general reluctance, that's one of the reasons that elder mediation hasn't grown as much in Canada. But putting that aside, the barriers often are at the convening stage, the convincing people that mediation is safe and it'll be beneficial. People don't know what it is, and it's uncomfortable to talk about these things, so they don't want to join in. But I think that once they have joined and agreed to participate, the rate of settling and resolving things is quite high. The problem tends to be at the front end rather than the back end. I don't have any statistics on that, but I feel fairly confident that my colleagues would agree with that, having now had several years of attending meetings with the elder mediation section and getting to hear. It's kind of that's a kind of a fun group for anyone who's interested in this area, because there are mediators a lot from the States, but also from other countries who are involved in elder mediation. So you get to hear people's perspectives and stories. So that's fun. I see a hand of, sorry?
I'm thinking of taking my career in elder mediation.
Yes.
So I was a bit concerned, if do we have to be sympathetic towards them, and does the outcomes always come in compromising or accommodating, because it cannot go in competition and all that. But I guess compromising and accommodating, these two things can come along in the outcomes.
Well, yes, but the word accommodating has a specific meaning when I'm using it here. So if you think of it as a person having a disability, the person may need accommodation to level the playing field, to be able to, in the same way as someone who, has a physical disability and can't access a building without a wheelchair ramp. Somebody who's older may have, say, a cognitive disability or a physical disability and may not be able to fully participate without that type of accommodation, something to even the playing field. If you're curious about that aspect, then I recommend that you Google, and there's Erica Woods was the assistant director of the ABA's Commission on Aging, and wrote several articles on capacity to mediate. So particularly talking about when someone has cognitive disabilities, but talking about accommodation. So if you Googled Erica Wood and capacity to mediate, you should find some good articles on that particular topic. And she's really the leading expert on that topic.
Erica Woods, ERICA WOODS.
That's correct. Yeah.
Erica.
Yeah, she's retired now, but she was formerly the assistant director of the ABA's Association Commission on Aging.
So I think Afama has a question. I'll let you jump in. Afama?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I did have a question. Hi.
Hi.
So I did hear you mention that in elder mediation, the elders are really the main people that they're like they're like the major people whose concerns you're listening to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then how do you then balance that, listening to them and then, putting your concerns at the forefront and at the same time not being biased
Yeah.
towards the other children?
Well, so it's a matter of, I would argue or say, so you want to be sure, I don't want to imply you don't want to have everybody else's opinions there, because you want to equally hear everybody else. But it's probably a matter that maybe more strategies are needed, different strategies are needed to hear everybody's voice. That might be the way to think about it. Because you know, there can be a dynamic. So think about it for a second. Because of views of older adults and because of ageism, it's very common to not actually hear what the older adult has to say, to actually talk to their children. When my mother was older, my mother was very feisty. She was really little, but really feisty. So I wouldn't have wanted to cross her. But we would go into a store and she was very competent, but probably not fast. But that didn't have to do with her age. My mother was very slow when she just liked to do things slowly. It was her personality. So we'd go into a store, when she got up into her 80s, and we'd come to the till, and right away the person behind the cash would say, "What would your mother want?" And I'd say, "Ask my mother." But it's very common in a lot of ways, for not just in mediation, but in society, for the older adult's voice to not be heard. So it's more a matter for the mediator to be aware of that and to make the extra step to be sure that the older adult is not being discouraged from expressing, or that no one in the mediation sort of being allowed to speak over the older adult or speak on behalf of the older adult. So that doesn't mean you don't want to hear the other people, but just because of the general dynamics in society, you want to be sure that you're actually hearing the older adult's voice, that you're not hearing what their children say that the older adult wants. So, because of course you're right, if you were, and so it's not even that their voice is more important. It's just that one of the most important things is to make sure that their voice is actually there, so that you're hearing, this is what the 3 adult children want, and this is what mom wants, not just the voice of the 3 adult children. So
Yeah, thank you so much. I have one more question.
yeah.
So when I took like a course on elder mediation, we did hear they say that elder mediation is very new
Yes.
in the mediation family, and I'm not sure there are like laws that are governing like family mediation, for example. Yeah, so my question is, for example, you you reach a settlement with the family. How do you make sure that these settlements are followed and implemented? Like, what are the like legal guidelines? Like, are they like covered or backed up by the law? Just the way family mediation is.
Well, so you would think of this as a contract, but in a sense, it's probably depends on what the issue is. So if you have an elder mediation, as I described, and you were in a jurisdiction, like for example, British Columbia, when they finally bring that statute into force, where it's a court process and the court conflict is getting directed into mediation, well, then there's typically some way to enforce it by going back to court, because it's attached to a court dispute. But if there's no court dispute going on, then what you're actually reaching is a contract between people. And so then the question is the contract enforceable? And do the parties even want it to be enforceable? I would say that if they really wanted it to be enforceable, you could put clauses in it and write it up in a way that it actually was a legal contract, depending what it is. But that may not be what's important to the family. They may just want an understanding between them. So it's not even that elder mediation is new, although that's certainly true. True-ish. Elder mediation's actually been around in the States since the 1990s, but it's new in Canada, newer in Canada. So it's not the newness, it's the context in which it's occurring, that often this mediation occurs and it's not connected to a court dispute. So it really becomes a matter of a contract or agreement between the parties.
So I'll let the final question, and then we will end the event, go to Ria.
Hi. I would like to focus more on the business model of elder mediation. How do you promote such a field?
Yes. And you've hit on one of the challenges, particularly. I think this is one of the reasons it hasn't grown as much here. People don't know what it is. So I think that what I would suggest, if that's something that somebody wanted to add to their practice, is, of course, as I said, getting the appropriate training. And then as far as marketing it, I would spend time connecting with the types of organizations that would want to refer.
Mm-hmm.
So, there may find out where the places are that these kinds of disputes are finding their way to, like who are these families in conflict calling? Those agencies would be very pleased to have somewhere else to refer the family to. So I think that just by putting up an advertisement saying I'm going to do elder mediation, people might not know what it is, but creating those kind of referral sources. If you're in a particular place, like I knew someone who developed an elder mediation practice in Austin, Texas, that was very effective. That's because the area that he lived in was there was a lot of Mennonites, and he realized that if he used the words elder mediation, people wouldn't know what it was. So he called it family peacemaking, which fit into that culture. And he was then very successful in marketing his business. So I would then, I guess, first of all, look for referral sources, and then secondly, figure out who you're targeting, and is there language other than elder mediation that you can use to explain, even if it's a tag underneath, to help people understand what it is that you're doing. So those would be two of my suggestions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I learned so much. I'm so grateful for everybody who attended. I hope you took away as much as I did. We're going to be sharing a lot of these amazing tidbits on our next newsletter. So thank you so much, because I think there's some great resources and some great websites that students would love to check out. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll let you have the final words before we end it.
Yeah, so I would just give a plug again, and I don't get anything out of this. For those that are interested and want to connect with other elder mediators, just feel free to email me, and I can put your name on the mailing list for the professional development workshops. We just do it to raise awareness about the elder mediation field, but it's a good way to hear. You can pick a topic that interests you and go, and then you'll hear what other elder mediators have to say about that. So.
That's amazing. I hope you guys all do that. I will put, actually, do you want to put your email in the chat?
Sure.
Or if anyone's interested?